This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. House Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Week 8 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. I am your host, Jason Jarvie. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King. First off, I want to apologize for getting this to you a day late again. I've been super busy at work and just trying to fit everything in, and I want to get this out to you so I can help you with fantasy football. And next week, I'm going to be recording early because I technically have my own bye week next week. Going on vacation, so I'm going to record early, and that'll get out to you on Friday. But anyways, let's get into Week 8. You know, we're halfway through the actual NFL season, and we're really coming close, or quickly coming close to the end of the majority of the regular seasons in fantasy football. And it's about time where, if your team just isn't doing that good, it may be time to look towards the future. If you're in a league where you get to keep, where you have keepers, and if you can trade for somebody, you might want to look to do that. Because at this point, if you're sitting at 1-7 or 2-6, you really have to have a massive turnaround. And it may not be your fault. I have bad teams where it just hasn't worked out. The people you drafted, if they would have performed the way that they were supposed to, you would have had a great fantasy season. But for whatever reasons, the fantasy gods decided not to shine down on you and me this year. So if there's anything like that where you can trade and possibly get some keepers, or maybe if you're even interested in trading for draft picks. I'm not sure if a lot of leagues do that. There was a trade in my main league this week between a team that they traded away their first-round draft pick to a team who is essentially out of it. But it's a major deal, because next year you're looking at a guy who doesn't have a first-round draft pick now. Now, that person in mind is Chris Hanks, who he's been on the show, and I've talked about him before. He is the trade master, so sometimes a first-round pick doesn't mean it too much to him. But still, I digress. Trading draft picks is one way to make your league interesting. It can make some trades that look preposterous a little bit better if you know that later on down the road they're going to be missing out on some decent players. Some other things, in my Slackjaw League, if you are out of it, and once you get to the playoffs, the season isn't over for the bottom four teams, because it used to be when we were picking draft, we would just take all the names and it'd be lottery style, where we would take them out, and the person who finished with the worst record had the best chance to get the first overall pick. We don't do that anymore. So we do lottery for the playoff teams. So the picks 5 through 10 go lottery style, but the bottom four teams kind of have their own playoff during the regular playoffs. So they play to get the first overall pick. So it's some might want to call it the toilet bowl, but if you win that toilet bowl, you are looking at getting the number one pick next year, which, unfortunately, first-round picks are looking worse and worse every year with picks like Odell Beckham Jr., who has recently come on, but he's been a bust, Todd Gurley, Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles in years past. First-round picks in general haven't meant as much. You just really have to draft well, draft as safe, try to minimize risk on your team, and really more than anything, hope for a whole lot of luck to come your way. But let's dive into the Week 8 matchups I have for you. Starting off, we have the first game on Sunday, 9:30 a.m., bright in the morning, over in London again. You got the Washington Redskins they're not. They're technically at the Cincinnati Bengals, but they're in London. So with Kirk Cousins, I think this is a pretty decent matchup for him. I think he's right on the borderline of being a starter this week. And then at the running back situation, Matt Jones has already been ruled out. So you're going to be looking at a timeshare between Chris Thompson and rookie Robert Kelly. And I think Chris Thompson is the guy you want to go in PPR leagues. But if you're looking for more of a workhorse back and more of a sleeper type, then Robert Kelly. I think both of these would fit in the flex positions. Thompson as a flex in PPR and Robert Kelly as a flex in standard leagues. At wide receiver, Deshaun Jackson is listed as questionable. He's probably going to play, and I think he has a decent matchup, but he's the boomer bust. And I'm really just moving towards that Jamison Crowder is really the number one option for Kirk Cousins right now. So I think Jamison Crowder, I think you put him in at flex, and I think he's a pretty good start right there. With Jordan Reed, he's looking like he's going to be back, and you need to get up early and check and see if he actually is going to play, because if he doesn't play, you're going to want to take him out immediately, so you're not dealing with 0 points sitting on your bench. You may not get many more points out of a backup tight end, but you never know that those 1 or 2 points could really make the difference in any fantasy game. Going over to the Cincinnati Bengals, Andy Dalton, I think this is an okay matchup for him. I kind of rate him similarly to Kirk Cousins. I think they're right on the borderline of the top 10 of breaking in here. It's a decent matchup. You look at the running backs. Jeremy Hill had big stats, but you look at how many rushing attempts. He had like 168 yards on 9 rushing attempts, which is it sounds a little crazy. So I would be very cautious with Jeremy Hill. I wouldn't expect him to get that type of production again this week. But I do like Hill and Giovanni Bernard. I think, they both really deserve to be considered. I think Hill is probably a borderline running back too, and Giovanni Bernard, I think he's in your flex conversation of, if you have somebody better, you play him over him. But if Bernard has the better matchup, you put in Gio Bernard. AJ Green, always a stud wide receiver. You're going to put him in your lineup. I think he's a good play. And Brandon LaFell, if you talk with the doc from the Doc and Jock show, he will toot his own horn that, I went out and I picked up Brandon LaFell, and I got to pat my own back. The dude got like 84 yards and a touchdown. Good for you, man. But Brandon LaFell, he is a sleeper. Andy Dalton's got to throw it to somebody. So Brandon LaFell this week makes my sleeper. He's a sleeper pick. Going to the next matchup, you got the Kansas City Chiefs at the Indianapolis Colts. I think this is a sneaky good game for Alex Smith. He's a game manager player, but I think going up against this bad Colts defense, something could happen. So obviously they are going to go with their running backs. So with Spencer Ware and Jamal Charles, Jamal Charles still getting work back into this offense, and with the way Spencer Ware is producing right now, they're gonna ride the hot hand. Spencer Ware is gonna get his share of carries, which that would be my only concern for Alex Smith, is that if they get up big, they're not gonna throw the ball at all. They're just gonna hand it off. They're gonna play it safe because they need to win games. So Alex Smith, he's a sleeper for me. And then Spencer Ware over Jamal Charles at this point. I would still sit Jamal Charles until he really shows that he's 100% and he's taking the bulk of the carries. Jeremy Maclin, I think, along with Alex Smith, I would probably put him as a sleeper as well this week, just because somebody's got to catch the balls. And then Travis Kelce, the tight end, he's that safety blanket for Alex Smith. So I think he's always in the mix as a top 10 tight end. On the other side of the ball with Andrew Luck, I think he's going to have to start producing to get this team going, and that's what I said, is that he's going to struggle the first half of the season, and then he's going to pick it up late. So I think Andrew Luck should have a good game. He might struggle a little bit. Frank Gore, their starting running back, nothing special, but he's always producing at least a little bit, so he's always in that conversation for running back too. And the only wide receiver I really feel comfortable on the Colts is T.Y. Hilton, just because, no matter what, Andrew Luck is going to try and find him. And, T.Y. Hilton and Brandon Cooks on the Saints, you kind of compare the two, but I think T.Y. Hilton is just a little bit better. He's the focal point of that offense in the aerial attack. So I think T.Y. Hilton is a good start, not liking any of the other wide receivers or tight ends on the Colts. Next matchup I got on the board is the Oakland Raiders at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Derek Carr he's been solid, and I think he's right there. Again, another quarterback who's right at the top 10, and you could consider starting him against the Buccaneers because the Buccaneers don't have a great defense. And what I would also worry, though, is Latavius Murray being healthy. He came back last week. You weren't sure if he was going to play, but he came back, and he really showed that he's still got it, and it doesn't look like the injuries are affecting him too much. So I think Latavius Murray is a good start. But I think Derek Carr, if you have any bye week issues, Derek Carr is a good start. And maybe if your quarterback, your main quarterback is struggling, Derek Carr might actually be a better start. A guy that I would consider starting Derek Carr over would be a guy like Cam Newton with a tough matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. Phillip Rivers going with a tough matchup going into Denver playing the Broncos. I think you might say I'm crazy, but I might even start him over Aaron Rodgers this week. Aaron Rodgers on the road going up against the Falcons. The Falcons actually have an okay defense. So, and Aaron Rodgers not playing up to the Aaron Rodgers that we've seen in past years. So Derek Carr could be an okay start this week. I already talked about Latavius Murray. The wide receivers, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree. It's really come down to you kind of have to start both of these guys because they both have the potential to get you big points. And I think Cooper is the more dependable, like he'll week in, week out, get you a pretty solid 8 receptions, 80 to 90 yards, and maybe a touchdown here. And he's going to be that dependable point total where Michael Crabtree he's been the red zone threat. And I was looking at some stats at the red zone targets where that Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree both have 6 red zone targets. The only difference is that Michael Crabtree has caught all 6 of his targets, where Amari Cooper has 0. So I think Amari Cooper, he's due for a big day. And going up against the Buccaneers, I think he could have that big day this week. Going over to the other side with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jameis Winston, as I've been saying, this guy is going to be a good quarterback. I said that he'd probably break the top 10 by the end of the season. I think he's pretty much on pace to get there. Hit a really good week last week. I mean, he was only playing against San Francisco, but 269 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. I told you to start him in my starts and sits, and I think that he's actually has a running back now. With Doug Martin out, it was kind of up in the air who was going to replace him, but Jaquiz Rodgers has really stepped up. So I think Winston, I think he's a good start. I think I put him in my top 10, and I'd start him with confidence this week. Jaquiz Rodgers is another guy he's skyrocketed up boards. He's probably been huge on waiver wires the past week or two. And I think you start him against the Raiders. The Raiders don't have a great defense. So I think he's a pretty decent start, probably at least a running back 2 or in your flex conversation. And then Mike Evans is really the only wide receiver I feel comfortable starting for the Buccaneers because Winston's really going to spread it around. Mike Evans is the only guy who's going to get consistent targets to get you enough fantasy points. Going on to the Seattle Seahawks traveling to New Orleans to take on the Saints. With the Seahawks, they're coming off of a tie, which I told you that Seattle-Arizona matchup was going to just be a bad matchup. Neither of those teams were going to do very good. So I think Seattle is really going to want to bounce back at this point. And there really isn't a better team to go up against with the Saints. They don't have a great defense. So I think Russell Wilson, he could have a pretty decent game. I put him in my top 10 of quarterbacks this week. And I think it goes across the board for the entire offense. I think Christian Michael will probably see better production. He only had 16 carries for 52 yards against the Cardinals. I think the Saints are going to give him a little bit more. So, Christian Michael, I probably put him in the top 10 of my running backs. And then Doug Baldwin also. He's probably in the top 15, top 20 of wide receivers this week. And Jimmy Graham, I think all those guys have potential, and you should be starting them in fantasy this week. And I think conversely, on the other side with the Saints, they're going up against a really good defense. So it's tough to say to sit guys like Drew Brees and Brandon Cooks and Mark Ingram. What I would do is I would just expect, unless you have a guy like Derek Carr or a really good backup, I would probably still start Brees. Just expect that this might be one of those games where he doesn't get over 300 yards, but Drew Brees always somehow amazes people. He may be able to torch the Seahawks defense. If anybody can, he is a smart quarterback and is a very skilled quarterback. So, but I would probably expect a little bit less from this week because the Seahawks are going to be gunning for him. Mark Ingram, I think, again, it's as with the Seahawks across the board on the offense, they're going to do better going up against the Saints. And I think the Saints across the board, you got to expect a little bit less from them. Mark Ingram, I think you still have to put him in the top 15 of running backs. He's at least good enough to be a running back too. And then between the three wide receivers, you got Brandon Cooks, Willie Snead, and Michael Thomas. And what I'm thinking is that you're probably going to get a good game out of one, a decent game out of another, and then pretty much nothing out of the last one. And it's back to the same conversation of which one was it going to be this week. So if I really had to pick one that I think might actually have a really good game, I'd probably say Michael Thomas, because you got to figure that Richard Sherman is going to be taking away Brandon Cooks, or doing his best job to take away Brandon Cooks. So, and then Willie Snead is the other guy that they're going to try and take away. So Michael Thomas might be the guy who's forgotten about. So I think Michael Thomas, I'd probably have him in a flex. I think Brandon Cooks then is also going to be the next guy, because even though he's going to be covered by top cornerbacks, he's still going to get his targets. And then Snead, I'm just not sure what he's going to do this week. I mean, it could be the complete opposite. It could be Snead and Thomas who are the two main focal points, and Cooks just gets taken away. But it's just my thinking. I'd go Thomas, Cooks, Snead this game. Next matchup I got for you, my Detroit Lions going to Houston to take on the Texans. Matthew Stafford having a MVP caliber type season, which is something crazy to talk about, and some may still say that he's got a long way to go, but just the way he's been playing, you got to bring it up. And I think he's actually finally turning his fantasy stats into real NFL play. So I think Matt Stafford, he's definitely I think he's at least a top 5 quarterback right now, fantasy and NFL wise, the way he's playing. Theo Riddick, he's missed the last couple games, and he's still questionable, but they're saying that he's likely going to play. Same with Dwayne Washington. So the whole Zach Zenner, Justin Forsett, that may be done for now. If these guys are healthy, Theo Riddick is definitely going to be in there on passing downs, and you might see a timeshare between Dwayne Washington and Zach Zenner for running downs, but at this point, it's tough. So really the only guy that I'd really feel comfortable starting would be Theo Riddick if he is playing. If Riddick isn't playing, I'm probably not starting any of those guys, because this team is going to pass the ball, which leads me to the wide receivers. Marvin Jones, definitely a start. And Golden Tate, he's finally worked it back into being dependable. I think you put him in your flex position, and I think he's a really solid start right there. Going to the other side of the ball with Houston Texans, Brock Osweiler. As much good has been said about Matthew Stafford, there's been a ton of criticism on Brock Osweiler so far. That he left Denver, he took the big money, and he just really hasn't panned out. And this probably isn't the week for him to really start getting back into people's good graces. I think he's probably gonna struggle. And even if he is pretty good, because the Lions make bad quarterbacks look good, even if he is better than average, it's not gonna be very good fantasy wise. So I'd probably not starting him. Lamar Miller, who has been one of the top running backs fantasy wise, he's gonna be a game time decision. So you're gonna have to watch on Sunday morning, see if they rule him out, and if you're lucky enough to have Alfred Blue as a handcuff to Lamar Miller, then he would be the guy to put in. I think Alfred Blue, though, at this point right now, at best he's a flex option. But going up against the Lions, I don't really like his matchup too well because teams are really going to focus on trying to beat the Lions through the passing game. Case Keenum threw for over 300 yards. Kirk Cousins looked unbeatable. And even though the Lions beat the Redskins, they were able to move the ball up and down the field on Lions, and there were costly turnovers and mistakes on their part. So the passing game is where it's going to be at for the Texans this week. So I think DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller, both of those guys are definitely startable this week. I think Hopkins, you're starting him in your wide receiver position. And I think Will Fuller is you put him into your flex option, and he's going to be a pretty solid because they're going to pass the ball. And both Hopkins and Fuller are really good wide receivers, so they should be able to do some damage against the Lions defense. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll wrap up the rest of my matchups. I'll give you my starts and sits. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork.
Bang, 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 bang. Vamonos, vamonos. Bang, bang, bang. Vamonos, vamonos.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Let's wrap up the rest of the matchups I have for you this week. Going with the New England Patriots, going to the Buffalo Bills. They're looking for some revenge against them. They're the only loss that they suffered without Tom Brady, and they kind of they took a lot of pride in getting that win. And I think the Patriots are just going to go into Buffalo and pound them so hard that Rex Ryan may just quit at the end of the game, but probably not. I digress. Tom Brady, always a good start. You're going to start Tom Brady no matter what because he's on his revenge tour of the NFL. He's a good start. I think LeGarrette Blount is a good start this week because the Patriots probably going to get up big on the Bills and they'll just start handing him off the ball. James White, I think in PPR leagues, he's a good play, but probably more as a flex option. But there's only so many balls to go around. So I think Blount is the one exception because he's the guy that when they get up, they're just going to hand the ball off to him to run down the clock. So, Julian Edelman has been the guy who hasn't really had that game since Brady's gotten back. So I think Julian Edelman, it may be his game this week. I think I've said that. I might have said that last week, but I think you still have to start him in hopes that he has that. He has the ability to get like a plus 10 catch day with over 100 yards and a touchdown or two. Rob Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett, I think unfortunately, you got to start both of them because I think Rob Gronkowski is he really is the main option now but you never know. Martellus Bennett may have that, if you can get 80 yards and maybe a touchdown out of your tight end, I think that's a really good thing to get because the majority of the time, tight ends, they get you nothing. So I think you're starting both of those guys right now. On the opposite side of the ball, it's going to be a tough day for the Buffalo Bills. Tyrod Taylor, it's just not going to be his game. It's going to be a tough matchup against these Patriots. LaShawn McCoy at this point is doubtful. He was doubtful last week and suited up and just wasn't effective. And then their backup, Mike Gillislee, he's questionable at this point too. So, I mean, if Gillisley is able to make it, I still don't like his matchup. I'm probably not starting him. And if he isn't playing, then I probably wouldn't play any Bills running backs. And I actually wouldn't really start any Bills this week. None of the wide receivers really just jump off the page. Robert Woods, Marquise Goodwin, it's a tough matchup against the Patriots. So I'd probably stay away from the Bills this week. Next matchup I got is, last year it was a powerhouse matchup. This year it's a little lackluster with the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Carolina Panthers. It's a 3-3-1 team against a 1-5 team. These are the two teams who we're really looking to take the next step in the NFC, and they just fallen off the map this year. Carson Palmer still a little banged up, but if he can take advantage of the Panthers defense, he could have a decent game. I put him right on the border of top 10 quarterback this week. David Johnson, he's going to get his yards. They're going to feed him the ball as much as possible. So David Johnson is a good start this week. And then the only wide receiver I feel comfortable with is Larry Fitzgerald. And that's not just because Larry Fitzgerald is the best wide receiver of the bunch, but Michael Floyd looking like he might not even play. John Brown is questionable. He might suit up, but you're not sure what you're going to get out of him. So Larry Fitzgerald really the main receiving option. Actually, it's going to be Larry Fitzgerald, and then it's going to be David Johnson because they run the majority of their offense through David Johnson. On the other side of the ball, with the Panthers, you have Cam Newton, who's coming off of a MVP year. It's got to definitely be a letdown. He's missed games, but I think Cam Newton, you probably have to start him because even though this isn't a great matchup, at least he's at home, and you just got to hope that you get, at worst, a normal day out of Cam. Obviously the worst possible scenario is that he throws a bunch of interceptions, but I think you can at least bank on him having a normal day, maybe somewhere around 200 to 250 yards passing, maybe 2 touchdowns, maybe an interception, and then anything he gets on the ground is just going to be gravy for you. So I think you still start Cam Newton. I really like Jonathan Stewart, even with this Cardinals defense. I think they always hand the ball out to Jonathan Stewart, and somehow he always seems to plow through defensive lines. So I do like Jonathan Stewart this week. Probably he's the guy I like best on that team right now. Kelvin Benjamin I would be very wary of, similar to last week with the Seahawks taking on the Cardinals. Doug Baldwin was going to either be going up against Patrick Peterson or Tyrann Mathieu. So the same goes for Kelvin Benjamin this week. He's going up against really, really good defensive backs. So I don't expect much out of him this week. But Greg Olsen is always the dependable. He's a top 10 tight end. You start him with confidence. Next matchup I got for you, I got the San Diego Chargers at the Denver Broncos. Phillip Rivers, it's definitely going to be a big test for him. It's a good defense, but I think when they played the Broncos earlier, he was able to move the ball, and I think they kind of went away in the second half of that game. So I would look for Phillip Rivers to have maybe not a huge day, but he's definitely good enough to start this week. Melvin Gordon, he just continues to get touchdowns. So I think you plug him in and hope that he can at least get you like somewhere around 60 yards and a touchdown. And he's going to fulfill your duty as running back 1 or 2. The wide receivers, Travis Benjamin and Tyrell Williams, this is where I think only one of these guys this week, and maybe actually even not either of these guys, because one of them, I think the biggest threat in their first game against the Broncos was their tight end, Hunter Henry. So they both will probably have not so great days, but if I had to pick one, I'm going to go Tyrell Williams. I think he's been getting the lion's share of targets. So I think he could have the better day than Travis Benjamin. And I think you put in Hunter Henry because when the Chargers played the Broncos last, they were able to exploit their defense, and the tight end was able to just get a ton of yards and he got a touchdown. So you got to think that the Broncos will game plan for that and try to take him away. But I think he's probably, he's probably in the bottom part of the top 10 this week for tight ends. On the other side of the ball with the Denver Broncos, Trevor Siemian, again, I've said it before. I like the guy. He just isn't getting it done fantasy-wise. And so I'm not starting him this week. C.J. Anderson this week came out that he had a meniscus tear, so he had surgery to repair it. He's out indefinitely. And the guy that I told you about in the preseason, the rookie running back Devontae Booker, he's going to be getting the carries this week. So I think he's actually a really good play. If the Broncos can't get a lead, they're going to try and control this game. So I think Devontae Booker could be a decent start. I think he's at least a running back too. And at worst, I think you put him in your flex. And the wide receivers for the Broncos kills me. You never know if one of them is going to do good, if both of them are going to do good, or if they're both just going to do nothing. So if you go by risk level, I say Emmanuel Sanders is probably the safest bet, and then Demaryius Thomas, even though you drafted him high, at this point he's just killing you because he's not producing like a number one wide receiver. So I don't have a problem if you're benching Demaryius Thomas this week. Going on to my next matchup, there's a lot of good matchups this week. There really weren't a ton of duds, and really probably the biggest dud it would be Monday Night Football when you got the 5-1 Vikings taking on the 1-6 Bears. But aside from that, you got the Green Bay Packers going to Atlanta to take on the Falcons, and this could be a game where Aaron Rodgers, again, he's not playing that great this year. But this is a Falcons defense that isn't that great. But I think Rodgers could have one of those 300 yards, 3 touchdown games that we've seen and loved from him in before. And especially because their running game is kind of it's a big question mark. They've been getting by having their wide receiver Ty Montgomery be their primary rusher, but they want to go away from that. They have Don Jackson, who's dealing with a hand injury, and then they traded for Nal Davis, but he's still picking up the offense, which leads me to believe, I think Ty Montgomery is probably the safest of those 3 to start. If I go anyone after that, I'd probably go Don Jackson and then Nile Davis. Until Davis can prove that he's picked up the offense, then you're probably still looking at Don Jackson and Ty Montgomery in front of him. Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams. I think for this game, because they're going up against not so great defense, I think you kind of have to start all of them. Jordy Nelson, you're always starting him in wide receiver 1 or 2. And then Randall Cobb he's the epitome of the flex. And I think you start him this week. And then if you're looking to shake things up, I think you might want to put Devontae Adams in at flex. But I'm not as confident about him. So Nelson and Cobb, I think you definitely start this week. And then Devontae Adams is that wild card where he could be the main focal part of the offense, or he could do absolutely nothing. On the other side of the ball, you got the Atlanta Falcons. And I've been saying it all year, people. And if you haven't believed me yet, just get on the train. Ride the Matt Ryan train. He's been good all year. He's the number 1 quarterback right now. And he hasn't started. He's gone up against good defenses, and he's always succeeded this season. So, again, going up against the Packers, they're at home. It's going to be a good game for him. So, Matt Ryan, I definitely start him. Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman is out this week, and he's might be out indefinitely. So, this is a really good thing for Devontae Freeman owners, because now he's going to be the main guy getting all the carries and getting all the pass catching opportunities. So Devontae Freeman could have a really big game this week. That would be if I had to predict a bold prediction, I'd probably put Devontae Freeman with 200 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's completely possible for him this week. And then the only wide receiver I like on the Falcons, and it's because he's an all-star wide receiver, Julio Jones. The rest of those guys, they can go kick rocks. Julio Jones is the main guy you want to start on that team. Last matchup I got for you is Sunday Night Football. You got an NFC East big matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Dallas Cowboys. We could be seeing two rookie quarterbacks going up against each other, or we could be seeing a rookie quarterback going up against a guy who might be leaving the field on a walker. So with the Philadelphia Eagles, after their hot start, Carson Wentz really has cooled off, and I think he's going to struggle. I think he's going to struggle this week going up against a really good Dallas Cowboys defense. So this isn't the week to put him back in your starting lineup. Ryan Matthews, not huge on him because the Cowboys have a really good rush defense. So Matthews not going to be a good start this week, and you're probably going to see a lot more Darren Sproles. I like him in PPR leagues because the Eagles may have to be playing catch-up in this game. So Sproles could be a big part of that offense. And the only wide receiver I like this week for the Eagles, Jordan Matthews. If I had to pick one other as a sleeper, maybe Josh Huff, because he's a dynamic type player. But Jordan Matthews really the guy who's going to get the majority of those targets, and you can't really predict the rest of those guys. Going over to the Dallas Cowboys, it's this is probably the biggest question of the week of, is it going to be Dak Prescott or is Tony Romo, who they're saying is healthy, he's been participating in practices, are they really going to bench Dak Prescott, who's got this team on a winning record towards the top of the NFC East, for their aging quarterback? It's almost very similar to the movie Any Given Sunday, where you have Cap gets his back injury, and then you bring in the rookie mobile quarterback, and they just continue to win. So it's going to be a real big question, and I would really monitor that. I'm not sure if I'm starting either of those guys this week. Dak Prescott, if you're desperate, I think you might start him, but you got to watch and see if he actually does play. Romo, I'd definitely leave on the bench until he actually proves he can do it. Ezekiel Elliott, the running back, obviously he's shown that he can do it, so I would start him. I think he's going to have a decent week against the Eagles in a primetime game. It's going to be good for him. And then their other primetime superstar wide receiver, Dez Bryant, he's back this week. And I think of all the people, I think it's going to be the Ezekiel Elliott show. And this, I think it could be the return of Dez Bryant. The Eagles defense, it's okay, but it has been exposed in recent weeks. So I think Dez Bryant could have a really good game this week. And then Cole Beasley, just because I think they're going to toss the ball around a bit and try and spread the Eagles defense out. Cole Beasley might be worth a flex play, but I'd probably leave him on the bench in most situations. And Jason Witten, the ageless wonder, he's still a top 10 tight end. You put him in there and hope for the best. That wraps up the matchups for this week and about wraps up the show, but I can't leave you without giving my starts and sits. So last week, depending on how you want to rate it, I either finished 3-3 or 4-2 with my. I'm gonna highlight that I told you to sit the majority of those players from the Arizona-Seattle game. The one question mark is Carson Palmer. I think that I get credit for telling you to sit him because he had 342 yards, but he had no touchdowns, no interceptions. He didn't really do anything else. So if you're in a league where you get a bunch of points for yards, then that's good news for you, and I don't get credit for that. But in leagues where touchdowns mean everything, he did nothing in that game. So I think I'm 4-2, and I'm going to stick with that. But moving on to this week, the quarterback who I think is a really good start this week is Alex Smith. And it's a guy that I normally hate, and I told you to start him in week 6. I'm going to go back the well until I actually get it right on him. I think he has an even better matchup this week against the Indianapolis Colts, and he should get at least a touchdown or two. Hopefully. I could be wrong again. We'll see. Going to my sit side, I'm sitting Cam Newton, going up against an Arizona defense who shut out the Seahawks offense last week. I think they're going to have great success against Cam Newton, who's having a down year. Going to running backs, the guy who I think we didn't cover this game, But I think Matt Asiata of the Vikings taking on the Chicago Bears on Monday Night Football could have a pretty good game. Jerick McKinnon is questionable, and they're not sure if he's going to start. So I think Matt Asiata could really pick up and do some damage against a bad Chicago team. My sit of the week for running backs, Jeremy Hill, Cincinnati, going against the Washington Redskins. I think the 168 yards is the outlier. Jeremy Hill lives getting 60 yards a game and a touchdown. So I think you're probably going to get at least a return to there, and you may even have a worse game this week. For wide receiver, I just said it. Dez Bryant, I think he's going to have a big game against the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't think they have cornerbacks that can cover him. I think he's going to come in healthy. He's going to come in hungry, and he's going to want to really put this team on his back and win some games. So I think Dez Bryant, he's my start of the week at wide receiver. My sit of the week, Brandon Cooks. Again, with ramifications from the last game, with the Arizona-Seattle game. Brandon Cooks going up against Seattle. They shut down Fitzgerald. They shut down everybody on the Cardinals. So they're going to shut down somebody on the Saints. And I think Brandon Cooks is going to be that guy. He's going to be going up against Richard Sherman, against their top guys. So Brandon Cooks, my sit of the week for wide receiver. That wraps up my starts and sits, and that wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds, Week 8. I will see you on the other side. As I said, I'm going to record early, and because I'm going on bye next week. But I will still respond if you want to hit me up on Twitter with any questions. Contact me at Jarvie the King. But until next week, later, nerds.